Hello, this is Peter Carter with a Climate Emergency Institute video. The topic is the most horrid crime of all time, which is fossil fuel subsidies. This is a long, incredible, terrible story that I've been following for way too long. The situation today is that total fossil fuel subsidies amount to trillions of dollars a year. That's from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and 2021 saw the largest increase ever in fossil fuel subsidies, now at about the same amount as they were in 2010. That's from the IEA, the International Energy Agency. Now we're going to take a look at the many harmful and deadly and very costly effects of fossil fuel pollution. This is highly relevant to fossil fuel subsidies and the amount of those subsidies, and we'll be looking at that down the line with respect to the estimates of fossil fuel subsidies running into the trillions of dollars a year from the International Monetary Fund. And that's just showing you the extent of the harm, the deadly effects, and the huge costs. You see, subsidizing of fossil fuels by any moral or ethical standard is the ultimate criminal evil. Fossil fuels are the great polluter. We've known for over 100 years that fossil fuel air pollution is a killer. And the more we learn about the toxic effects of fossil fuel air pollution, the more disorders, diseases, and deaths we find that this air pollution contributes to. Probably not surprising, because it gets down into the lungs, and the fine particles get down into the lung bloodstream and thereby into the general bloodstream, where it goes to all organs of the body. In fact, the latest research is that it kills over 10 million people a year, and this is the research of that published in 2021, and the quote is, "We estimate a global total of 10.2 million premature deaths annually attributable to the fossil fuel component of PM 2.5. That's a microfine particulate. And this research is very important because it specified the air pollution from fossil fuels. Also, global warming increases air pollution. And we've known that for many years. And of course, burning fossil fuels is the main cause of global warming and the sole cause of ocean acidification. So, the way I've looked upon this for some years now is that fossil fuel pollution kills every day, and then it continues killing forever through its greenhouse gas pollution, which of course builds up in the atmosphere and has reached truly globally deadly proportions now. So clearly killing over 10 million people every year, year on year on year, when it does all kinds of other, even more terrible damage. This terrible killing year on year on year is the greatest of all evils. So this wisdom quote from 2,000 years ago has certainly come of age today. There never has been more bad money made than the money being made by the fossil fuel industry today. And of course the quote, "The love of money is the root of all evil." One thing that makes this completely incredible is the vast profits that the fossil fuel industry is making. The fossil fuel industry has made huge profits over the past 50 years and is now making the largest ever profits. And this is a recent quote from a business journal. So here's the quote. "Fossil fuel energy, oil and gas firms' profits are set to smash records, reaching $834 billion in 2022. That's from Rystad Energy. And then a report from The Guardian of July 2022. The headline revealed oil sector's staggering $3 billion a day profits for the last 50 years. And that's the report from The Guardian. The vast total captured by petrostates and fossil fuel companies since 1970 is $52 trillion, and our governments are still subsidizing them. Some background for this is a quote from 18th of July 2022 from the Secretary General Antonio Guterres. He said at the end of a statement, "We have a choice, collective action or collective suicide. It is in our hands." Well, I have been pointing out with my reports on the climate change science for some years that the world is on a suicide scenario. It's not exactly in our hands, though. It's in the hands of the fossil fuel corporations, of the big investment banks that finance their atrocious new fossil fuel extraction projects, and in the hands of our fossil fuel promoting and subsidizing governments. So continued government subsidizing of the fossil fuel industry in 2022 is obviously criminally evil. After all, the Secretary General has said that we are in the process of committing collective suicide. And in 2018, the UN Secretary General, you may remember, said that climate change is an existential threat to most life on the planet, including and especially humankind. That was at the Austria World Summit in 2018. So if this isn't immediately, obviously, the greatest evil, I'll use as my reference Albert Schweitzer, one of the most very highly respected people of our modern times. A brilliant man in many aspects and disciplines. And he's particularly well known for his reverence for life, philosophy, and religion, one of the many specialties that he was a student and leader on. And his quote on that is that reverence for life affords me my fundamental principle of morality, namely that good consists in maintaining, assisting, and enhancing life, and to destroy, to harm, or to hinder life is evil. And yes, he was a Christian pastor, among other things. When he is referring to life, he's referring to all life, not limited to human life. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, published Subsidies countervailing measures, and it defined them as follows. There is a financial contribution by a government that involves a direct transfer of funds, potential direct transfer of funds or liabilities, and government revenue that is otherwise due is foregone or not collected. And that is a very good definition, and it fits well with the accurate approach used by the IMF. So fossil fuel subsidies are measures taken by governments that artificially lower the price of coal, oil, and natural gas. And these take two forms. There's one, production subsidies, tax breaks or direct payments that reduce the cost of producing fossil fuels. And secondly, there's what are called consumption subsidies, the energy price cuts for consumers, such as setting fixed prices at petrol stations. About 3/4 of the world's subsidies are estimated to be focused on consumers and 1/4 on producers. Now, there's also two approaches for costing these subsidies, and that brings in the definition of direct and indirect subsidies. Direct subsidies are financing which is given by the government, which you just referred to, while indirect subsidies occur when governments allows the company to avoid a normal payment, such as a tax or externalized costs. And that's what fits in very well with the WTO's definition. So this is the largest single fossil fuel subsidy ever, the government pouring our money into the fossil fuel industry as part of its post-COVID economic recovery. This is from Energy Policy Tracker. It's a recent update of April 2022. Governments, by means of the post-COVID economic recovery against universal advice, gave the most support to the fossil fuel industry, $371 billion by April of 2022, and that's 40% of all energy-related public money. This is from a UNEP Gap report 2021, And this shows the cumulative public money that has been committed, given and promised to the fossil fuel industry by governments. And that runs from March of 2020 to May of 2021. And you'll see the majority of that money is to the fossil fuel industry on the bottom there. Way more than clean energy industry there. Press release on the extraordinary amount of money that the fossil fuel industry is still making. This is from April 2022 headline: World's biggest fossil fuel firms projected to spend almost $1 trillion on new oil and gas fields by 2030. And they're doing that thanks to the money that was handed out to them, the vast amount of money by our governments. Just 20 of the world's biggest oil and gas companies, including the likes of Shell, Exxon, Gazprom, are projected to spend $932 billion by the end of 2030 developing new oil and gas fields. And that's again according to Rystad Energy, and it's published by Oil Change International. So the public finance by our governments for fossil fuels from just 2018 to 2020, Oil Change International calculated that the governments had given 2.5 times more money to the fossil fuel industry than their support for the renewable energy industry. Absolutely evil. And so the government's fossil fuel subsidies, they're enabling the oil and gas corporations to keep making vast amounts of money, record profits. And there is a report from Rystad Energy, the data showing that. So the effect of fossil fuel subsidizing is obvious. It contributes to the continued increase in fossil fuel energy. It reduces investment in clean renewable energies. It maintains the dominance of fossil fuels over clean renewable energies. It continues and increases global emissions of CO2 and methane. It keeps the unprecedented atmospheric concentrations of CO2 and methane increasing, and increasing faster than ever. And it keeps global climate disruption and ocean disruption increasing and increasing fast. And ocean disruption is the three I've mentioned already: ocean heating, ocean acidification, and ocean deoxygenation. Now I'm taking you back into some history, and you'll probably be amazed, as I was some years ago, to find that the assessment of fossil fuel subsidies goes back to 2009. I found a World Bank study that reported that energy subsidies are expensive, damage the climate, and disproportionately benefit the well-off. Their reduction can encourage energy efficiency, increase the attractiveness of renewable energy, and allow more resources to flow to poor people and to investments in cleaner power. 2009. An evaluation of the World Bank win-win energy policy reforms. This is from the International Energy Agency World Energy Outlook of 2011, and this says the same things, that fossil fuel subsidies result in an economically inefficient allocation of resources and market distortions, while often failing to meet their intended objectives. And this runs through a long list of the adverse effects of subsidizing fossil fuels. This is from the International Monetary Fund, and there again is a similar list. I'll just let you look through that. No benefits, only losses, only adverse effects, more air pollution, more greenhouse gas pollution, and a worse world in the future. This is from that IEA report. It shows that fossil fuel energy subsidies go mostly to the rich. That's a 2011 report. And this again shows that fossil fuel subsidies They may be defended as benefiting the poor, but it's wrong. They benefit the rich more often than the poor. So how much are fossil fuel subsidies? So this is the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. This is a 2010 report by the IMF showing that government subsidies were amounting to trillions of dollars. This is the World Energy Outlook by the International Energy Agency, and this goes back to 2008, and they illustrated the enormous difference between subsidies to fossil fuels and subsidies to renewables, and this is all documented there. I remember looking at that, and it of course totally shocked me. Another from IEA, energy subsidies of 2009 from their World Energy Outlook of 2011, again documenting the huge difference between government subsidies to fossil fuels and subsidies to renewable energies. IEA 2010 showing the same thing, breaking it down by coal, oil and gas and electricity. So that is that 2011 IEA World Energy Outlook, way back in 2011, an analysis of fossil fuel subsidies. And there was also an analysis and a joint report by the IEA, OPEC, OECD, and the World Bank. They prepared the submission for the G20 meeting, and they of course advised the G20 that there was no justification for continuing fossil fuel subsidies, and that they were and are damaging in all aspects. And that's specifically the language of the IEA and the World Bank. This shows government subsidies since the 2015 Paris Agreement. This is a report 2021 by Bloomberg, and that reported that all G20 countries had continued to subsidize fossil fuels substantially since the 2015 Paris Agreement, and there are the amounts. This is a similar report from the Financial Times of 2016. Vast difference between fossil fuel subsidies. This goes up to $80 billion, and renewable energy subsidies, and that graph goes up to $20 billion. So there's a massive, massive difference. This is from the IEA, a BBC publication showing the countries with the highest consumption subsidies and breaking it down to gas, electricity, and oil. And that's in tens of billions of dollars. This shows fossil fuel subsidies in 2020 and apportioned to the various countries, and that's the graph, the numeric graph. This map I put because it's easier to tell where the highest subsidies are coming from, and the biggest ones are coming from China. And so we come to the IMF on fossil fuel subsidies. This is 2015 IMF estimate of $5.3 trillion a year. Report from the International Monetary Fund on the 2015 $5.3 trillion. So in 2021, the IMF repeated an assessment of fossil fuel subsidies, and it was published in September of 2021. They found that fossil fuel subsidies were even higher than what they had estimated in 2015. They're now almost practically $6 trillion a year. And this breaks it down into oil, coal, gas, and electricity. And 5 countries are responsible for 2/3 of the subsidies, and those are China, Russia, India, and Japan. And what the subsidies do is that they put the costs of extracting fossil fuels, they reduce the costs by 50%. So the IMF, the subsidies are so high, and properly so high, because the IMF includes indirect subsidies, both the taxation indirect subsidies and, more important, the externalized socio-environmental costs, which make up by far the most of the $5 or $6 trillion total. To end this huge subsidy, governments have to impose a carbon pollution charge, what people are calling a carbon tax, but it's a remedy, it's a correction to the what is a market failure. You remember the Stern Commission report back in 2006. And since the Stern Commission, there have been many studies that have costed the pollution charge at around and above $200 per ton of carbon. This is from the IEA, and this is their most up-to-date estimate of direct-only fossil fuel subsidies of 2021, a massive increase from 2020, where there was the COVID economic decline, and our governments poured money into the fossil fuel industry. As the IEA said, fossil fuel subsidies stormed back in 2021 to $440 billion, almost back to the 2018 amount, and as you can see, practically the same as bad as they were in 2010. This was, of course, the biggest single-year increase in fossil fuel subsidies ever. And in the 2021 report, the IMF predicted that fossil fuel subsidies, which are $5.9 trillion or 6.8% of GDP in 2020, they say they are expected to increase. And it's a big increase to 7.4% of GDP in 2025. So not only are the fossil fuel subsidies at an astronomical record high, the increase is expected to continue up to at least 2025. And finally, and most importantly, an aspect of the IMF recent 2021 report, in which the IMF estimated and showed what happens if those subsidies are terminated. And of course what happens is, and I've been saying this for years, is that emissions of CO2 and also methane come crashing down, because the reason for that is quite simply that, as we know, the great renewable clean energy sources, technologies, are practically cost competitive now with the fossil fuel industry, despite the evil subsidizing of our governments. And so you stop those subsidies, and the power sensitivity of the market will switch all that money out of the fossil fuel industry and into the renewable energy industry, where it has to go if we are to survive. Efficient fuel pricing by 2025 would reduce global CO2 emissions 36% below their baseline levels, equivalent to a 32% cut below the 2018 levels. And this would be in line with keeping warming to well below 2 degrees and towards 1.5 degrees C, although thanks to the evil partnership of our governments, fossil fuel corporations, investment bank corporations, 1.5 degrees C, which is disastrous, is now out of reach. So there's the answer to climate change mitigation. There's the answer to our future survival. There's the answer to the survival of most life on this great and glorious planet Earth. You can see it. It's terminating fossil fuel subsidies, and terminating them fast, right away. I'm going to give the final word to the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, a speech that he made in 2019. And the quote is, "Many people still think that to give fossil fuel subsidies is a way to improve living conditions of people. There is nothing more wrong than that. What we are doing is using taxpayers' money, which means our money, to boost hurricanes, to spread droughts, to melt glaciers, to bleach corals, in one word, to destroy the world. And in one word, that is evil. That is the most incredible, unprecedented evil imaginable. And somehow, someone has to make it stop.